Welcome to Poetry Lockdown, day 93. Um, I've got a poem from Claudia Rankine, Weather. I'm really excited about sharing this with you. Um, so, one of the things I've mentioned with the lockdown is what does it mean to write a poem in response to um, overwhelming uh, history that's unfolding around you. What does that look like? How do you do it? Because usually poetry is recollected in stillness and tranquility. You have some kind of space or buffer between what's happening. But what if you're trying to create something right in the midst of what's happening around you? So it's really interesting because New York Times Book Review, they asked two prominent poets to actually write in response to what's happening. And so those poets, to their credit, said, "Okay, I'll give it a shot." So Claudia Rankine is the poet I'm going to read today. There's also another great poem by Jericho Brown. I think I'll probably read that later. It's part of the lockdown series as well. But if you haven't read Claudia Rankine's work, I really recommend it. She's really well known for a book-length poem called Citizen, which is, I would call it a meditation on race and racism in this country, and maybe not even just this country, really. But it's a terrific book-length poem. Really recommend it. So she's well known, terrific poet. So let's read her work, Weather, and I'll just talk about why I admire it. It's a new poem too, so it's uh, it's it's exciting. Here we go. Claudia Rankine's Weather. On a scrap of paper in the archive is written, "I have forgotten my umbrella." Turns out, in a pandemic, everyone, not just the philosopher, is without. We scramble in the drought of information, held back by inside traders, drop by drop. Face covering? No. Yes. Social distancing? 6 feet under for underlying conditions. Black. Just us and the blues kneeling on a neck with the full weight of a man in blue. 8 minutes and 46 seconds. In extremis, I can't breathe, gives way to asphyxiation, to giving up this world. And then, mama, called to, a call to protest, fire, glass, say their names, say their names. White silence equals violence. The violence of, again, a militarized police force, tear gassing, bullets ricochet, and civil unrest taking it, burning it down. Whatever contracts keep us social compel us now to disorder the disorder. Peace, we're out to repair the future. There's an umbrella by the door, not for yesterday, but for the weather that's here. I say weather, but I mean a form of governing that deals out death and names it living. I say weather, but I mean a November that won't be held off. This time, nothing, no one forgotten. We are here for the storm that's storming because what's taken matters. Powerful poem. Um, so what I'm really intrigued by is the metaphors and the line breaks in this poem. I think it's clear to me that like at the end of lines and leading into the next line, there's double meanings happening and shadings and blendings happening. And probably one of the most striking ones is that 6 feet, right, which is the social distance recommended, and that blends into 6 feet under, and African Americans dying under the weight of a man in blue. That sort of that blend is one of the most striking ones. But there's that happening throughout the poem, and she's absolutely very sensitive to line breaks and the blending of meaning that happens. And also, I'm really struck by the blending of the metaphor itself, or the chief metaphors themselves. This idea of weather, in one sense, it's the whole middle part of the poem, right? The weather is all of the weight of a man in blue, George Floyd's death, and then the protest that has come from that, that's part of the weather. But then it shifts, it blends like that line break blended earlier. And now she says, no, let me expand the meaning of this metaphor. She says, I say weather, but I mean a form of governing that deals out death and names it living. And so now we've got weather that is both those who have responded to what is happening and the government who is pushing down. So again, it's really interesting, like a blended meaning of the metaphor itself. And then for me, a question, and I don't have the answer. I'm just a new reader of this poem, like you are. Is the umbrella. As if weather has those two potential meanings, and the poet herself offers those two potential meanings. What about the umbrella? Um, because that is named early on in the poem, and we see it by the door, not for yesterday, but for the weather that's here. And so I read that in some sense as the presence of us showing up to this moment, lending our voice to the protest, working for justice. That's a possible interpretation. But it occurs to me that you out there listening can also lend your interpretation. So feel free to offer a comment. This is just my first provisional and reading of a really powerful poem, and props to Claudia Rankine for wading in and writing a poem in response. It's a challenging thing. Thank you all for listening. I've talked enough with interpretation. I'm not going to read it a second time. I will say, listen to the poet read it herself, right? If you go to that link on the bottom, New York Times Book Review, really terrific reading. And she's, I think, as the writer of the poem, way more sensitive than I am to the line breaks of this poem. So thanks so much, y'all. Have a great rest of your day.